Thomas Mitchell had been standing in the same spot for 3 hours straight. His back was perfectly straight, his eyes focused ahead, and his hands remained steady at his sides. The red uniform felt heavier today, but he would never show it. 22 years of service to the royal family had taught him to hide his pain well. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the marble floor where Thomas stood guard. He had been assigned to Prince George's wing for the past 5 years, watching the young prince grow from a shy boy into a thoughtful teenager. Today felt different somehow, though Thomas couldn't quite put his finger on why. Prince George, now 15, walked past Thomas every morning on his way to breakfast. Usually, the prince would nod politely and continue on his way. Thomas appreciated the acknowledgement. Many royals walked past guards as if they were furniture, but Prince George had always been different. There was something gentle about him, something that reminded Thomas of his own grandson. Thomas had joined the Royal Guard when he was just 20 years old. Back then he was full of energy and pride. Protecting the royal family felt like the most important job in the world. He had missed countless family dinners, birthday parties, and holidays. His wife Sarah had been understanding, but Thomas could see the loneliness in her eyes during those long years. Their son Michael had grown up barely knowing his father. Thomas was always at the palace, always on duty, always putting the royal family before his own. When Michael had children of his own, Thomas promised himself he would be a better grandfather than he had been a father. But even that promise was hard to keep with his demanding schedule. The pain in Thomas's knee had started 3 months ago. At first it was just a small ache after long shifts. Now it felt like someone was driving a nail through his joint every time he moved. The palace doctor had recommended surgery, but Thomas kept putting it off. Who would cover his duties? The Royal Guard was already short-staffed, and Thomas felt responsible for maintaining the security standards he had built over 2 decades. Sarah had been asking him to retire for years. She wanted to travel, to see their grandchildren more often, to have quiet mornings together over coffee. Thomas wanted those things too, but leaving felt like abandoning his post. The royal family depended on him. Prince George depended on him. As Thomas stood there that morning, he noticed Prince George approaching earlier than usual. The young prince looked thoughtful, almost sad. His usual morning energy seemed subdued. Thomas straightened his posture even more, if that was possible, and prepared for the familiar, polite nod. But Prince George stopped walking. He stood in front of Thomas, studying his face with curious eyes. Thomas kept his gaze straight ahead as protocol demanded, but he could feel the prince's attention like a warm spotlight. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Prince George said softly. Thomas was surprised. The prince rarely spoke to him directly and never by name. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, his voice steady despite his confusion. Prince George shifted from foot to foot, clearly wanting to say something more. Thomas waited patiently, still looking straight ahead. The castle was quiet around them, with only the distant sounds of staff preparing for the day's activities. "Mr. Mitchell," Prince George began again, then paused. "May I ask you something?" This was highly unusual. Guards and royals maintained a professional distance, speaking only when necessary. But something in the prince's voice made Thomas look down at him. The boy's eyes were kind, genuinely interested. "Of course, Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully. "How long have you been standing guard here?" Thomas thought for a moment. 22 years in the Royal Guard, sir. 5 years specifically assigned to this wing." Prince George nodded slowly. "Do you have a family, Mr. Mitchell?" The question caught Thomas off guard. In all his years of service, no member of the royal family had ever asked about his personal life. "Yes, sir. A wife, a son, and 2 grandchildren. Do you see them often?" Thomas felt his chest tighten. How could he explain to this young prince that duty had kept him away from the people he loved most? "Not as often as I would like, sir," he answered honestly. Prince George was quiet for a long moment, studying Thomas's face. There was an intelligence in the boy's eyes that seemed far beyond his 15 years. Thomas had watched him grow up, seen him transform from a playful child into this thoughtful young man, but he had never really looked at him, really seen him as a person rather than just his charge. "Thank you for protecting us all these years." "Mr. Mitchell," Prince George said suddenly, "I know it must be difficult sometimes." Thomas felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. In 22 years, no one had ever thanked him for his service. Not directly, not personally. The words hit him harder than he expected. "It has been my honor, Your Royal Highness," Thomas managed to say. Prince George smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I hope you have a wonderful day, Mr. Mitchell. Please give my regards to your family." With that, the prince continued on his way to breakfast, leaving Thomas standing alone in the hallway. But something had changed. The weight of his uniform felt different now, lighter somehow. The pain in his knee seemed less sharp, and for the first time in years, Thomas found himself thinking about what it would be like to have breakfast with his own family, to read stories to his grandchildren, to take Sarah on that trip to Scotland she had been dreaming about. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, but its warmth felt different now. Prince George's simple words of gratitude had opened something in Thomas's heart that he had kept locked away for far too long. He remained at his post, professional as always, but his mind began to wander to possibilities he had never allowed himself to consider before. The next morning brought gray clouds and the promise of rain. Thomas arrived at Windsor Castle an hour before his shift, as he had done every day for 5 years. But today he found himself walking slower, taking time to notice things he had never paid attention to before. The way the morning light hit the ancient stones, the sound of birds singing in the courtyard, the smell of fresh bread drifting from the palace kitchens. Prince George's words from the day before kept echoing in his mind. No one had ever acknowledged the sacrifices he had made, the time away from family, the physical toll of standing guard for hours on end. The prince's simple thank you had touched something deep inside Thomas, something he thought he had buried long ago. As Thomas took his position outside Prince George's wing, he couldn't help but think about his grandson Jamie. The boy was 8 years old now, obsessed with football and constantly asking when Grandpa Thomas would come to one of his matches. Thomas had promised to attend the next game, but royal duties always seemed to interfere. Jamie had stopped asking about 6 months ago, and Thomas realized with a heavy heart that his grandson had probably given up hope. The morning passed quietly. Thomas stood at attention, watching the staff go about their daily routines. He had memorized every face, every pattern, every sound that belonged in the castle. It was this attention to detail that had made him such an effective guard. But today, instead of feeling pride in his vigilance, Thomas felt tired. Bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. At exactly 9:15, Prince George appeared for his morning walk to breakfast. But instead of his usual school uniform, he was wearing casual clothes. Thomas wondered if the prince was ill, but the boy looked healthy and alert. If anything, he seemed more energetic than usual. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell," Prince George said, stopping in front of Thomas once again. "Good morning, Your Royal Highness," Thomas replied, trying to hide his surprise at this second day of direct conversation. "I was wondering," Prince George said, clasping his hands behind his back in a gesture that reminded Thomas of the boy's father. "Do you ever get time off?" Thomas blinked, unsure how to respond. "I have scheduled leave, sir. 2 weeks annually, plus bank holidays when coverage permits. When did you last take a holiday, Mr. Mitchell?" The question made Thomas uncomfortable. He had accumulated months of unused leave over the years, always finding reasons to postpone time off. Someone might need extra coverage, or there might be a special event requiring additional security. The truth was, Thomas had become so accustomed to work being his entire identity that he didn't know how to exist without it. "It has been some time, sir," Thomas admitted. Prince George nodded thoughtfully. "My grandmother often says that rest is not a luxury but a necessity. She believes that people who take care of others must first take care of themselves." The wisdom in those words struck Thomas deeply. Queen Elizabeth had indeed been known for her practical approach to well-being, both for herself and those who served the crown. But Thomas had always interpreted dedication as never taking breaks, never stepping away from his post. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas began hesitantly, "may I ask why you're not in school today?" Prince George's face lit up with a mischievous smile. "It's a teacher training day. I have the whole day free, which is why I wanted to talk to you. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday." Thomas felt his pulse quicken. Had he said something inappropriate? Had he somehow crossed a line by being too personal? "I hope I didn't speak out of turn, sir," Thomas said carefully. "Not at all," Prince George assured him quickly. "Actually, I wanted to ask you more about your family. You mentioned grandchildren? Despite his training to maintain professional boundaries, Thomas found himself opening up to this thoughtful young prince. 2 grandchildren, sir. Jamie is 8, and little Emma just turned 5. They live about an hour from here with my son Michael and his wife. Do they know what you do for work? Thomas smiled slightly. Jamie thinks I'm a knight who protects castles. Emma believes I live in a fairy tale. Prince George laughed, a genuine sound that echoed through the quiet hallway. That's wonderful. They must be very proud of you. I'm not sure they understand why I'm away so much, Thomas said quietly, then immediately regretted the admission. He was sharing too much, being too personal with someone he was meant to protect, not befriend. But Prince George's expression grew serious, almost sad. I understand that feeling, he said softly. Sometimes duty keeps us away from the people we love most. The simple statement revealed so much about the prince's own life. Thomas realized that this young man, for all his privilege and status, understood sacrifice in ways most teenagers never would. The weight of future kingship, the constant public scrutiny, the careful balance between personal desires and royal obligations, Prince George lived with pressures Thomas had never fully appreciated. Your Royal Highness, Thomas said gently, if I may say so, you seem to handle your responsibilities with remarkable grace. Prince George looked surprised, then pleased. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. That means a great deal coming from you. I've watched how dedicated you are, how you never complain or show frustration even during the longest events. You've been a quiet example of service. Thomas felt his chest swell with unexpected emotion. In all his years of striving for perfection, he had never realized that anyone was watching, learning from his example. The idea that his dedication had somehow influenced this remarkable young man filled him with a pride deeper than any commendation or recognition could provide. I should let you get to your breakfast, sir, Thomas said, noticing that they had been talking much longer than usual. Actually, Prince George said with that mischievous smile returning, I was hoping you might join me. I mean, if protocol allows. I thought we could continue our conversation over tea. Thomas was speechless. In 22 years of service, he had never been invited to share a meal with any member of the royal family. The invitation was unprecedented, generous, and completely unexpected. I'm honored by the invitation, Your Royal Highness, Thomas said carefully, but I'm not sure it would be appropriate. Let me worry about appropriate, Prince George said with a confidence that reminded Thomas the boy would someday be king. Besides, I checked with my private secretary this morning. Personal invitations from royals to staff members are entirely within protocol, especially when the staff member has served with such distinction. Thomas felt his world shifting slightly off its axis. Everything he thought he knew about boundaries, about his role, about his place in the palace hierarchy was being gently challenged by this extraordinary 15-year-old prince. If you're certain it's acceptable, sir, Thomas said slowly, then I would be honored to join you. Prince George's smile could have powered the entire castle. Excellent. And Mr. Mitchell? Today, could you tell me more about Jamie and Emma? I'd very much like to hear about your family. The small breakfast room where Prince George led Thomas was nothing like the grand dining halls Thomas had seen during official events. This was a cozy space with comfortable chairs, family photographs on the walls, and windows that overlooked the castle gardens. It felt more like a normal family's breakfast nook than part of a royal residence. Thomas sat carefully on the edge of his chair, still not quite believing this was happening. A palace staff member brought tea and fresh pastries, treating the unusual situation with professional discretion. Thomas had worked with these people for years, but today they looked at him with curious smiles, clearly wondering how he had earned this special invitation. Please. Relax, Prince George said, noticing Thomas's rigid posture. You're off duty for the next hour. I cleared it with Captain Williams myself. Thomas tried to loosen his shoulders, but 22 years of military bearing wasn't easy to shake off. This is very kind of you, Your Royal Highness. Please call me George when we're alone like this, the prince said, pouring tea for both of them. And I want to hear about Jamie and Emma. What are they like? Despite his nervousness, Thomas found himself smiling as he thought about his grandchildren. Jamie is football mad. He plays for his school team and practices in the garden every evening. His mother says he sleeps with his football boots on sometimes. Emma is quieter, loves books and drawing. She makes me pictures that I keep in my locker. George's eyes lit up with interest. That's wonderful. Do you have any of Emma's drawings with you? Thomas hesitated, then reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small, carefully folded piece of paper. She drew this last month. It's supposed to be me at work. George gently unfolded the drawing. It showed a stick figure in a red uniform standing next to a large building with many windows. The figure had a big smile and was surrounded by hearts. At the bottom, in wobbly letters, Emma had written, "My Grandpa the Knight." "This is beautiful," George said softly, studying the drawing with genuine appreciation. "She clearly loves you very much." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "I wish I deserved it more. I've missed so many important moments with them. First steps, first words, school plays, birthday parties. Sarah, my wife, she sends me pictures and videos, but it's not the same as being there." George was quiet for a moment, looking thoughtful. "My father once told me that quality matters more than quantity when it comes to time with family. He said that being fully present for 1 hour is worth more than being distracted for a whole day." "Your father is wise," Thomas said. "But it's hard to be fully present when part of your mind is always here, always thinking about duties and responsibilities. Is that why you've never taken extended leave?" George asked gently. Thomas nodded. "This place, this job, it becomes who you are. I've been Thomas the Royal Guard for so long, I'm not sure I remember how to be just Thomas." George leaned forward, his young face serious but kind. "My grandmother used to say that the crown doesn't make the person makes the crown worthy. I think the same is true for any uniform or title. You're not Thomas the Royal Guard. You're Thomas who happens to be a Royal Guard. The man comes first." The simple wisdom of those words hit Thomas like a gentle blow. He had spent so many years defining himself by his job that he had forgotten there was a person underneath the uniform. A husband, a father, a grandfather who had dreams and desires beyond these castle walls. "When did you become so wise?" Thomas asked, managing a small smile. George laughed. "I've had excellent teachers, and I've been thinking a lot lately about what it means to serve others. I used to think service meant giving up everything for duty, but I'm starting to understand that the best service comes from people who are whole and happy themselves." Thomas sipped his tea, letting the warmth spread through him. "Your future subjects will be lucky to have you as their king." "I hope so," George said quietly. "I want to be the kind of leader who remembers that every person matters, that everyone has a story worth hearing. Like yours, Mr. Mitchell. I've walked past you hundreds of times, but I never really saw you until recently." "What changed?" Thomas asked, curious. George looked out the window at the gardens. "I started paying attention." "Really paying attention? I noticed that you favor your left leg sometimes, that you look tired even when you try to hide it. I saw the way your face lights up when you check your phone during breaks. I assume that's when you get messages from your family. And I realized that I was walking past a real person with a real life, not just a fixture in the hallway." Thomas was amazed by the prince's observational skills. "You saw all that? My grandmother taught me that a good monarch notices everything. But more than that, she taught me that noticing isn't enough. You have to care about what you see. And I care about you, Mr. Mitchell. You've been protecting my family for years. Someone should be looking out for you, too." The conversation was interrupted by a gentle knock on the door. Captain Williams, the head of palace security, entered with a respectful bow. "Your Royal Highness, I apologize for the interruption, but I need to speak with Mr. Mitchell about this afternoon's security briefing." George stood up gracefully. "Of course, Captain. Mr. Mitchell, thank you for joining me this morning. It's been enlightening." As Thomas stood to leave, George touched his arm gently. "Mr. Mitchell, I hope you'll think about what we discussed. Your family needs Thomas the grandfather just as much as we need Thomas the guard." Walking back to his post, Thomas felt as if he was seeing the castle with new eyes. The hallways he had patrolled for years seemed different somehow. The portraits of past royals looked down at him with what felt like approval rather than judgment. And for the first time in months, the pain in his knee seemed manageable. Captain Williams walked beside him in comfortable silence until they reached Thomas's station. "Interesting morning?" the captain asked with a knowing smile. "Very interesting, sir," Thomas replied. "Prince George is quite remarkable, isn't he? Old soul in a young body. He specifically requested to have breakfast with you, you know. Asked permission from his parents and everything." Thomas felt a warmth spread through his chest. "He's going to be an extraordinary king." "Yes, he is," Captain Williams agreed. "And Thomas, you've got accumulated leave that expires at the end of the year if you don't use it. Might be time to think about taking some of those days." As Captain Williams walked away, Thomas resumed his position. But everything felt different now. The uniform felt less heavy, the hallway less like a prison, and in his pocket, Emma's drawing seemed to radiate warmth, reminding him that somewhere not too far away, two little children were waiting for their grandfather to come home. That evening, Thomas sat in his small flat near the castle, staring at his phone. Sarah had sent him a video of Jamie's football practice, and little Emma had drawn another picture, this one showing a family having dinner together. The empty chair at the table was clearly meant for him. He called Sarah, something he rarely did during the week because he was usually too tired after long shifts. "Thomas?" Sarah's voice was surprised but pleased. "Is everything all right? You don't usually call on weekdays." "Everything's fine," Thomas said, settling into his favorite chair. "I just wanted to hear your voice. How was your day?" They talked for an hour. Sarah told him about her volunteer work at the local library, about Jamie's upcoming football match this Saturday, about Emma's excitement over starting piano lessons. Thomas found himself really listening, asking questions, engaging in a way he hadn't done in years. "Thomas," Sarah said eventually, her voice soft with concern. "You sound different tonight. Are you sure you're all right?" Thomas thought about Prince George's words about being fully present, about the man underneath the uniform. "I'm thinking about taking some time off," he said quietly. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Thomas wondered if the call had dropped. "Did you say time off?" Sarah finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I have weeks of accumulated leave. I was thinking, maybe I could come home for Jamie's match this Saturday. Maybe we could plan that trip to Scotland you've been wanting to take." Sarah began to cry, soft tears that Thomas could hear through the phone. "Oh, Thomas, I've been hoping for this for so long. But what's changed? What's made you think about this now?" Thomas told her about Prince George, about their conversations, about seeing himself through the eyes of someone who noticed not just his dedication, but his sacrifices. Sarah listened without interrupting, and Thomas could picture her sitting in their kitchen, probably holding her cup of evening tea. "This prince sounds like a remarkable young man," Sarah said when Thomas finished. "He is. He made me realize that I've been so focused on serving others that I forgot about the people who matter most to me. You were serving us too, Thomas, providing for our family, keeping us secure, but I'm glad you're ready to come home now." The next morning, Thomas arrived at work with a formal leave request in his pocket. He had filled out the paperwork the night before, requesting 3 weeks off starting the following Monday. His hands had shaken as he wrote the dates, but he had forced himself to complete it. Prince George appeared for his morning walk, right on schedule. Today he was back in his school uniform, but he still stopped to talk to Thomas. "Good morning, Mr. Mitchell. You look different today." "How so, Your Royal Highness?" "Lighter somehow." "Have you been thinking about our conversation?" Thomas pulled the leave request from his pocket. "I'm going to ask Captain Williams for 3 weeks off. I want to go to my grandson's football match this Saturday, and my wife and I are going to take that trip to Scotland." Prince George's face broke into a brilliant smile. "That's wonderful news. I'm so pleased." "It's because of you," Thomas said simply. "You helped me remember who I am beyond this uniform." "No, Mr. Mitchell, I just reminded you of what was already there. The decision to prioritize your family, that courage came from you." Thomas felt a swell of gratitude toward this wise young man. "Your Royal Highness, may I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you do this? Why did you take the time to notice me, to talk to me about my life?" Prince George was quiet for a moment, looking thoughtful. "My great-grandmother used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't how they treat those above them, but how they treat those who serve them. She said that kindness to those who cannot benefit you in return is the truest form of nobility. She sounds like a wise woman." "She was. But there's another reason too," George continued. "I've been learning about what it means to be a future king, and I've realized that leadership isn't about being served. It's about serving others, and that includes making sure the people who dedicate their lives to service are taken care of." Thomas was moved by the maturity and compassion in those words. "You're going to be an extraordinary leader." "I hope so. And Mr. Mitchell, I hope you have a wonderful time at Jamie's match. I'd love to hear about it when you return." After Prince George left for school, Thomas walked to Captain Williams' office. He knocked on the door with more confidence than he had felt in months. "Come in, Thomas. What can I do for you?" Thomas placed the leave request on the captain's desk. I'd like to request 3 weeks of leave, sir, starting Monday. Captain Williams picked up the form and read it carefully. This is quite sudden, Thomas. Is everything all right? Everything's fine, sir. I just realized it's time I spent some time with my family. The captain leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas's face. You know, I've been wondering when you'd finally take some of this accumulated leave. You're entitled to it, and frankly, you need it. You've been carrying more than your share for years. Thank you, sir. There's just one thing, Captain Williams said, reaching into his desk drawer. Prince George asked me to give you this. He handed Thomas a sealed envelope with his name written on it in careful handwriting. Thomas opened it to find a letter and a small photograph. The letter read, "Dear Mr. Mitchell, thank you for your years of dedicated service and for sharing your story with me. I hope your time with your family brings you as much joy as you've brought to ours through your faithful protection. The photograph is from my personal collection. I thought Jamie might like to have a picture of the castle where his grandfather works. Please give my best regards to your family. With gratitude and respect, George." The photograph showed Windsor Castle from the gardens, looking majestic and beautiful in the morning light. On the back, Prince George had written, "For Jamie, your grandfather truly is a knight who protects castles. You should be very proud of him." Thomas felt tears prick his eyes. In all his years of service, he had never received such a personal and thoughtful gesture from any member of the royal family. "He's quite something. That young prince," Captain Williams said quietly. "Yes, sir. He really is. Go home, Thomas. Enjoy your family. The castle will still be here when you get back." As Thomas walked through the castle corridors for the last time before his leave, he felt a sense of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "I've already bought tickets for Jamie's match. Welcome home, my love." For the first time in decades, Thomas Mitchell was going home not because his shift was over, but because he had remembered that home was where he truly belonged. Saturday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and the promise of a perfect day for football. Thomas stood in front of his bedroom mirror, looking at himself in civilian clothes for the first time in months. Jeans, a warm sweater, and comfortable walking shoes. He hardly recognized himself without the familiar red uniform. Sarah appeared in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look handsome," she said, handing him a cup. "And nervous. It's been so long since I've been to one of Jamie's matches. What if I don't know what to say to the other parents? What if I don't understand the game well enough?" Sarah laughed gently. "Thomas, you're overthinking this. You're his grandfather. Just cheer when he does something good and hug him when it's over. That's all he wants." They drove to the football pitch together, Sarah chattering excitedly about the other families they would meet and the progress Jamie had been making this season. Thomas listened, trying to calm his nerves. After years of protocol and precise procedures, the casual chaos of a children's football match felt almost foreign. When they arrived, Thomas spotted Jamie immediately. The boy was warming up with his teammates, his face serious with concentration as he practiced passing drills. He hadn't noticed his grandparents yet, and Thomas took a moment to really look at him. Jamie had grown taller since Thomas had last seen him, and there was a confidence in his movements that hadn't been there before. "Grandpa Thomas," Emma's voice pierced through the noise of the crowd. She came running toward them, her pigtails bouncing, clutching the photograph Prince George had given Thomas. "Look, Daddy showed me the picture of your castle. Are you really a knight?" Thomas knelt down to Emma's level, his heart swelling as she threw her arms around his neck. "I'm just a guard, sweetheart. But thank you for thinking I'm a knight. The prince who lives in your castle thinks you're special," Emma said seriously. "He wrote me a nice message on the back of the picture." Before Thomas could respond, Jamie spotted them from across the pitch. The boy's face lit up with pure joy, and he came running over, still in his football boots and grass-stained jersey. "Grandpa, you came! You actually came!" Jamie's excitement was infectious, and Thomas felt any lingering nervousness melt away. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Thomas said, ruffling Jamie's hair. "Are you ready to show me how good you've gotten?" "I've been practicing every day. Mum says I might even score a goal today. Will you cheer for me?" "I'll be the loudest one here," Thomas promised. The match was everything Thomas had hoped it would be and more. Jamie played with determination and joy, his love for the game evident in every move. When he scored in the second half, Thomas found himself jumping up and cheering louder than he had ever cheered for anything in his life. The other parents around him smiled at his enthusiasm, and several came over to introduce themselves. "You must be Thomas," said a woman with kind eyes. "I'm Rebecca, Jamie's coach's wife. Jamie talks about you all the time. He's so proud that his grandfather protects the royal family." Thomas felt a flush of pride, but also a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry I haven't been to more matches. You're here now," Rebecca said simply. "That's what matters." After the match, which Jamie's team won 2-1, the family went for lunch at a small cafe near the pitch. Thomas sat between his grandchildren, listening to them chatter about school, friends, and their plans for the upcoming half-term holiday. Emma showed him more drawings she had made, including one of their family having Christmas dinner together. "Will you be home for Christmas, Grandpa?" Emma asked, her big eyes hopeful. Thomas looked across the table at Sarah, who was watching him with patient love. Then he looked at his son Michael, who had driven down from London to watch Jamie's match and spend time with his father. "Yes," Thomas said firmly. "I'll be home for Christmas, and for many more Christmases to come." That evening, back at his flat, Thomas video-called Prince George. The palace had provided secure communication devices for emergencies, but Thomas had never imagined using his for a personal call. The prince answered immediately, his face appearing on the small screen with a warm smile. "Mr. Mitchell, how was the football match?" "Incredible, Your Royal Highness. Jamie scored a goal and I got to meet all the other parents. Thank you again for the photograph. Emma treasures it. I'm so glad. You look happy, Mr. Mitchell. Really happy." Thomas realized it was true. He felt lighter than he had in years, as if a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. "I am happy," Thomas said, "and it's because of you. Because you helped me remember what really matters." Prince George shook his head. "You would have figured it out eventually. I just happened to ask the right questions at the right time." "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said carefully, "I need to tell you something. Being with my family today, seeing how much I've missed, how much they need me, I think it might be time for me to retire." Prince George was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Have you made a decision?" "Not yet, but I'm seriously considering it. I want to be present for my grandchildren while they're still young. I want to travel with my wife, maybe volunteer at the local school, help coach Jamie's football team." "Those sound like wonderful plans," Prince George said softly. "And Mr. Mitchell, if you do decide to retire, I want you to know that your service has meant everything to our family. You've been more than a guard. You've been a steady, reliable presence that allowed us to feel safe and secure." Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. Will you promise me something?" Prince George asked. "Of course. Whatever you decide, make sure it's what will make you happiest. You've spent 22 years putting duty first. Now it's time to put yourself and your family first." After the call ended, Thomas sat in his quiet flat, thinking about the future. For the first time in decades, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond the castle walls. A life where he could be at every one of Jamie's matches, where he could read bedtime stories to Emma, where he and Sarah could wake up together every morning without the pressure of royal duties calling him away. The decision was becoming clearer with each passing moment. Thomas Mitchell was ready to step down from his post, not because he was abandoning his duty, but because he had finally learned the difference between serving others and sacrificing himself. Outside his window, Windsor Castle stood majestically against the night sky, its windows glowing with warm light. Thomas looked at it with affection rather than obligation for the first time in years. He had served it well, and now it was time to serve the people who loved him most. Thomas spent the next 2 weeks of his leave time traveling through Scotland with Sarah. They visited the Highlands, walked through ancient castles, and stayed in cozy bed and breakfast where nobody knew about royal duties or security protocols. For the first time in decades, Thomas was simply a tourist, a husband, a man enjoying the beauty of his country without the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Every evening he called his grandchildren. Emma would tell him about her day at school, showing him her latest drawings through the video call. Jamie would update him on football practice and ask when Grandpa would be home to play in the garden. These conversations became the highlight of Thomas's days, reminding him of what he had been missing all these years. On their last night in Scotland, Thomas and Sarah sat by a fireplace in their small hotel, watching the flames dance and listening to the wind outside. Sarah was reading a book, her head resting comfortably against Thomas's shoulder. I've made my decision, Thomas said quietly. Sarah looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. About retiring? Yes, I'm going to submit my resignation when we return. I want to be home, Sarah. Really home, not just physically present, but emotionally available too. Sarah set down her book and turned to face him fully. Are you sure? This has been your life for so long. Won't you miss it? Thomas thought about the question carefully. I'll miss parts of it. The sense of purpose, the feeling of protecting something important. But I won't miss the constant stress, the long hours away from family, the way duty always came before everything else. And I realize now that I can still serve, just in different ways. What do you mean? I've been thinking about volunteering at the local Veterans Center, maybe helping other retired servicemen adjust to civilian life. I could coach youth football, help at the library with you. There are so many ways to make a difference that don't require sacrificing family time. Sarah reached for his hand. The children will be so happy. And Thomas, I'm proud of you for making this choice. When they returned to Windsor, Thomas felt like he was seeing the castle with completely new eyes. It was still magnificent, still important, but it no longer felt like the center of his universe. He had a resignation letter prepared, formally written but warm in tone, explaining his decision and thanking the royal family for the honor of serving them. His first stop was Captain William's office. The captain looked up from his paperwork with a knowing smile. How was Scotland? Perfect, Thomas said, settling into the chair across from the captain's desk. Absolutely perfect. And I'm guessing you've made a decision about your future? Thomas placed the resignation letter on the desk. I'm retiring, sir. I'll work my standard notice period, of course, but I want to step down officially. Captain Williams read the letter carefully, nodding as he went through each paragraph. This is beautifully written, Thomas. Heartfelt and professional. I can't say I'm surprised, and I can't say I blame you. You've given this place everything you had to give. I don't feel like I'm abandoning my post, Thomas said. I feel like I'm graduating to something new. That's exactly the right way to think about it. When would you like your last day to be? 2 weeks from today, if that works with staffing requirements. I'll make it work. And Thomas, I think Prince George will want to know about this decision personally. He's been asking about you while you were away. An hour later, Thomas found himself once again in the small breakfast room where he and Prince George had shared tea. The prince looked older somehow, more mature than when Thomas had left just 3 weeks ago. Mr. Mitchell, welcome back. You look wonderfully relaxed. Thank you, Your Royal Highness. Scotland was exactly what I needed. And your family?
How are Jamie and Emma?
They're wonderful. Jamie scored 2 more goals while I was away, and Emma has started piano lessons. She's determined to learn Happy Birthday so she can play it for my birthday next month. Prince George smiled warmly. That's lovely. And speaking of birthdays, I believe congratulations are in order. Captain Williams told me you're retiring. Yes, sir. I wanted to tell you personally. Your conversations with me started this whole journey of self-reflection. How do you feel about the decision? Thomas considered the question. Excited, nervous, grateful, ready? Those sound like exactly the right emotions, Prince George said. I'm happy for you, Mr. Mitchell, though I'll miss having you here. You've been a constant presence throughout my teenage years. You'll have other guards, Your Royal Highness. Better ones, probably. Different ones, certainly, but none who will have taught me as much about quiet dignity and steadfast service. You've been an example I'll carry with me when I become king. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat. That's the greatest compliment I could ever receive. Prince George reached into his jacket and pulled out a small wrapped box. I have something for you. A retirement gift. Thomas unwrapped the box carefully to reveal a beautiful silver pocket watch. Engraved on the back were the words, "For Thomas Mitchell, who served with honor and reminded us that family comes first. With gratitude from the royal family. Your Royal Highness, this is too generous." It's not generous enough, Prince George said firmly. But I hope every time you check the time, you'll remember that time with family is never time wasted. Thomas was quiet for a moment, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Sir, may I ask you something? Of course. Why did you notice me? Out of all the staff here, why did you choose to reach out to me specifically? Prince George was thoughtful for a long moment. Do you remember the day we first really talked? You were standing guard, and I was feeling particularly sorry for myself about some royal obligation I didn't want to attend. Thomas nodded. As I walked past you, I saw your face. You looked tired, yes, but also content, proud of what you were doing despite the personal cost. And I realized that if you could find dignity and purpose in service, then perhaps I could too. You were teaching me something important without even realizing it. What was I teaching you? That true service isn't about what you give up, it's about what you choose to protect. You chose to protect my family, and now you're choosing to protect your own family time. Both are acts of service, just directed differently. As their conversation came to an end, Prince George stood and extended his hand. Mr. Mitchell, it has been an honor to know you, not just as a guard, but as a person. I hope your retirement brings you all the joy you deserve. Thomas shook the prince's hand, feeling the weight of 22 years of service shifting into something new. Not an ending, but a transformation. Thank you, Your Royal Highness, for everything, most especially for helping me remember who I am beneath this uniform. You're Thomas Mitchell, Prince George said with a smile. Husband, father, grandfather, and one of the finest men I've ever known. Don't forget that. Walking through the castle corridors that afternoon, Thomas felt a profound sense of completion. His service here had been worthwhile, meaningful, and honored. But his service to his family was just beginning. 2 weeks later, Thomas Mitchell walked through Windsor Castle for the final time as a royal guard. His replacement, a young man named David with eager eyes and perfect posture, had been shadowing him for the past few days. Thomas saw something of his younger self in David's enthusiasm and dedication. Remember, Thomas told him as they completed their final walkthrough together, you're not just protecting buildings or titles. You're protecting people, real people with families and feelings and hopes for the future. David nodded seriously. I'll remember that, sir. Thank you for showing me the ropes. Thomas's locker had been emptied of 22 years' worth of accumulated belongings. Emma's drawings, commendation letters, a few photographs, and the silver pocket watch Prince George had given him. Everything else had been distributed to other guards or donated to charity. It felt strange to see the empty metal space where so much of his life had been stored. Captain Williams appeared with Thomas's final paperwork and pension details. All sorted, he said, handing over the folder. Your service record is exemplary, Thomas. You should be proud of what you've accomplished here. I am proud, Thomas said, and meant it. But I'm also excited about what comes next. The formal goodbye ceremony was small but meaningful. Several members of the royal family attended, including Prince George, who spoke briefly about Thomas's years of faithful service. The other guards presented him with a framed photograph of the entire security team, and Captain Williams read a letter of commendation from the Queen herself. But the moment that touched Thomas most deeply came after the formal ceremony ended. Prince George approached him privately away from the other attendees. Mr. Mitchell, I have one final request. Of course, Your Royal Highness. Would you mind if I visited you sometime? Not officially, just as a friend. I'd love to meet Jamie and Emma properly. Maybe watch one of Jamie's football matches. Thomas was speechless for a moment. The idea that this future king would want to maintain a friendship with a retired guard was beyond anything he had imagined. They would be absolutely thrilled, Thomas managed to say. You would be welcome anytime. Excellent. I'll arrange something with my private secretary. And Mr. Mitchell, thank you again for everything. You've been far more than a guard to our family. Driving away from Windsor Castle for the last time, Thomas felt a complex mix of emotions. There was sadness at leaving behind such an important chapter of his life, but it was overshadowed by excitement for what lay ahead. Sarah sat beside him in the passenger seat, squeezing his hand as they passed through the gates. Any regrets? She asked softly. Thomas thought for a moment. Just one. I wish I had made this decision sooner. Their homecoming was everything Thomas had hoped for and more. Jamie and Emma were waiting in the front garden with a banner they had made reading, Welcome home, Grandpa Knight. The neighbors came out to wave, and Michael had organized a small party with family friends. But the moment that meant the most to Thomas came that evening. When the excitement had died down and the guests had gone home, he was sitting in his favorite armchair, Emma curled up on his lap while he read her a bedtime story, and Jamie sprawled on the floor working on homework. Sarah was in the kitchen humming while she made tea. Grandpa, Emma said sleepily, are you going to be here tomorrow? Yes, sweetheart. And the day after that? Yes. And for my piano recital next month? I wouldn't miss it for the world. Emma smiled and settled more comfortably against his chest. Good. I like having you home. Thomas kissed the top of her head, feeling a contentment he hadn't experienced in decades. This was what he had been missing, this quiet domestic peace, this simple pleasure of being present for the people who loved him. 6 months later, Thomas had settled completely into his new life. He was coaching Jamie's football team, volunteering at the Veterans Center 3 days a week, and had started a small garden where Emma helped him grow vegetables. He and Sarah had planned trips to visit old friends and explore places they had always wanted to see. The promised visit from Prince George came on a Saturday in spring. The prince arrived with minimal security, dressed casually, and spent the afternoon playing football with Jamie in the garden and listening to Emma play piano. He joined the family for dinner, charming everyone with his easy conversation and genuine interest in their lives. "He's not at all what I expected a prince to be like," Michael whispered to Thomas as they watched Prince George help Emma with a difficult passage on the piano. "He's going to be an extraordinary king," Thomas replied, "someone who truly understands that leadership means serving others." As the evening wound down, Prince George pulled Thomas aside for a private moment in the garden. "You look happy, Mr. Mitchell, really truly happy." "I am. Happier than I've been in years. Thank you for pushing me toward this decision." "I didn't push you anywhere. I just asked the right questions. You found the courage to make the change yourself." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the window as Emma showed her new piano skills to her family. "Your Royal Highness," Thomas said eventually, "I hope you'll always remember what you told me about finding balance between duty and personal happiness. The country will need a king who understands that taking care of yourself allows you to take better care of others." Prince George smiled. "I'll remember. And I hope you'll remember that you taught me something equally important, that the most valuable service comes from people who are whole and content in their own lives." As Prince George's car pulled away that evening, Thomas stood in his doorway waving goodbye. Emma was already asleep in his arms and Jamie was leaning against his side. Tired but happy from the exciting day. "That was the best day ever," Jamie said sleepily. "Yes," Thomas agreed, looking around at his family, his home, his new life. "It really was." The silver pocket watch in Thomas's pocket ticked steadily, marking time that now belonged entirely to him and the people he loved most. After 22 years of measuring his worth by his service to others, Thomas Mitchell had finally learned that the greatest service of all was being fully present for the moments that mattered most. In the distance, Windsor Castle stood against the evening sky, its windows glowing warmly. Thomas looked at it with affection and gratitude, but without longing. He had found his way home at last, guided by the wisdom of a young prince who understood that true nobility meant caring for the people who serve you, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is permission to choose happiness over duty. The royal guard had stepped down, but the man beneath the uniform had finally stepped into the life he was meant to live.